Untitled Chapter Vishnupada Śrīla Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Śrīla Prabhupada Ki Jai. Untitled Chapter Vishnupada Śrīla Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Gosai Maharaj Ki Jai. Untitled Chapter Vishnupada Śrīla Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Gosai Prabhupada Ki Jai. Untitled Vishnu Mahabhagavad Śrīla Gokshara Swami Maharaj Ki Jai. Untitled Vishnu Śrīla Satchidananda Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākura Ki Jai. Untitled Vishnu Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Śrīla Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Shiva Gurudeva Ki Jai. Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura Gopal Patidasha Ganath Śrīla Gosai Prabhu Ki Jai. Śrī Damodar Ramanandari Shiva Parashad Vrinda Ki Jai. Namachay Śrīla Haridas Ṭhākura Ki Jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Kshetra Mandala Gaura Mandala Vraja Mandala Mathura Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Sarva Abhishta Virata Giriraj Maharaj Ki Jai. Shri Radha Kunda Shama Kunda Ki Jai. Shri Yamuna Devi Ganga Devi Ki Jai. Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Shri Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Shri Purnamasi Yogamaya Ki Jai. Shri Gopeshwar Mahadev Ki Jai. Shri Tulsi Shri Vijaya Akarashi Titi Ki Jai. Titi Palan Karibhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Mādhurya-kadambinī Ki Jai. Shri Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura Ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Samagata Gaura Bhakta Ki Jai. Shri Nitai Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Gaura. Dandavat Pranams. I'm actually speaking to nobody right now, so that there are no viewers. But anyhow, I'm just reading this on my own for myself, and I thought I might as well just leave it open if anybody else wants to read with me. Otherwise, just reading it for myself anyways. So yeah, now just the day after tomorrow will be Shiva-ratri, Shiva-caturdaśī. Oh wow, okay, great. Raseshwari Mataji's there. Great, I'm not alone anymore. So yeah, Shiva-caturdaśī is coming up. And so I wanted to just be a little bit prepared for that and just have some little basic understanding of Śiva-tattva. So I thought to read from Mādhurya-kadambinī. This part, but actually this part is, yeah, it gets very deep into it and it's super technical and I have such a hard time understanding it. But sometimes for myself, I have an easier time understanding things when I'm reading it out loud. So anyhow, hopefully this is, yeah, I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking and I will share my screen. But yeah, just warning you, this is super technical. All right. Again. All right. Open this up. And I will, you know, everyone see the comments if anybody has anything to say. Okay, let me make this screen. So this is in Mādhurya-kadambinī. Let's see, I think it's 2:6. In Mādhurya-kadambinī, in the third shower chapter, it goes through all the different offenses, aparad, and this one, it's going into the 10 offenses to the holy name. And the second offense to the holy name is, let's see what the second offense is. I'm gonna make this full screen. Okay, there. The second offense to the holy name, Shivasya Shri Vishnurya iha guna namari sakalam dhiya bhinam pashyat sakalu hari nama hita kara. So the second offense to the holy name is mentioned in the verse above, beginning Shivasya Shri Vishnu. It can be explained in two ways. So this is the second offense to the holy name. These are the two explanations. First explanation is to consider the names, qualities, and so on of Sadashiv, the leader of the demigods, to be separate from those of Shri Vishnu, is an offense to the holy name. Because considering Sadashiv an independent controller separate from Bhagavan Shri Vishnu leads to the faulty doctrine of multiple supreme controllers, Bahu Ishwaravad. This will impede one's attainment of unalloyed devotion to Bhagavan. Shri Krishna is the supreme controller, and it is solely through his potency that Shiva and the other demigods attain the position of being controllers. They have no power separate from his. One who chants Harinam with this conviction will not commit this offense to the holy name. And this isn't really related to Shiva, but the second meaning of, the second interpretation of the second offense is, a person commits an offense to the holy name if, with his mundane intelligence, he distinguishes between the all-auspicious transcendental holy names, forms, qualities, and pastimes of Sri Vishnu and Sri Vishnu himself, who is the possessor of that name. Such chanting is certainly harmful. But we're not getting into that. We're getting into this part, this first part, talking about Shiva being in, about Shiva being an independent controller separate from Sri Bhagavan. All right. So where is it? It's 229. And we probably won't have enough time to read all of this because it's super long. Dang it. Okay, here we are. Close. Okay. And let me just see if there are any comments. Okay, cool. There's more people watching. Okay. So, this is beginning of text 3. Two types of sentient beings, independent and dependent. Bhavanuvad. This is Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura. Sentient beings, Caitanya, are of two types, independent and dependent. Of these, the all-pervading being known as Ishvar, the Supreme Lord, is an independent sentient being. The latter category is known as the Jiva, the living entity, who is able to pervade only the body he resides in. The living entity is subordinate to Ishvar, and thus it is is thus a dependent sentient being. Of these two types of sentient beings, the former, the supreme sentient being, is also of two types: untouched by the deluding material energy, Maya, and touched by the deluding energy, willingly for Lila. So let's see, there's a chart. I just downloaded. 1 second, let me open up this chart. This will make it a little bit more simple. Where is it? It's on my desktop. Yeah. Okay, so this is the Ontology of sentient beings, Caitanya-tattva. So first is the independent sentient being, the all-pervading Lord, and the dependent sentient being. And the independent one, the all-pervading Lord, independent all-pervading Lord, that's further divided into two categories: Narayan, Narayan and all the different, Varaha, Ramachandra, Nishinga, like all this. They are completely beyond the touch of Maya. And then there's Shiva and so on, who accepts the touch of Maya for Lila, for the sake of performing pastimes. So this is now my Gurudev's commentary on Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura's writing, Piyush Varshini Vritti. And let me just make sure that the screen is sharing properly. Where is it? Whatever. Sorry guys. Okay. Yes, it's working. Okay. Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura is now discussing the second offense to the holy name. Okay, they're making it a little bit bigger. Okay, so Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura is explaining the second offense to the holy name, which is to consider the names, qualities, and so on of Shriman Mahadev to be different from or independent of those of Sri Vishnu. In other words, it is an offense to consider Shiva and Sri Vishnu to be two separate independent lords, each perfect with distinct potencies. Because Shiva-tattva is abstruse, the author is explaining it comprehensively. Yeah, Shiva-tattva is so difficult to understand, but now we're getting a very detailed explanation. The fundamental nature of sentient beings is of two types. There's independent and dependent. The sentient being known as the all-pervasive Ishvar is independent, the Supreme Lord. He's independent. Although he appears in a human-like medium-sized form, by his inconceivable potency, that form is also all-pervading and limitless. And although in his sweet pastimes, the Lord is brought under the control of his devotees, he nevertheless remains fully independent. The infinitesimal sentient living entity is a special energy of the Lord that pervades only the material body he resides in and remains dependent. In other words, he is under the control of the Supreme Controller, Parameshwar. The infinitesimal sentient living entity is atomic by constitution. In Srimad Bhagavatam 11.16.11, Bhagavan Shri Krishna says to Uddhav, Shukshmanam apyaham jiva. Of minute objects, I am the Jiva. The Shrutis, Mundaka Upanishad, state the same. Esho nur atma chetasa veditavyo. The individual soul is as minute as an atom. Shvetashvatar Upanishad 5.9 likewise affirms, Balagra shatabhagasya shatada kalpitasya cha bhago jiva sabhigyeya sa chanantyaya kalpate. If the tip of a hair is divided into 100 parts, and if one of those little parts is again divided into 100, that is considered the size of the jiva. Such jivas are said to be eternal. It is for this very reason that Srila Jiva Goswami has written in his Paramatma Sandarbha Anuched 33, Shukshmata Parakashta Prapto Jiva. The individual soul is the ultimate limit of minuteness. It is impossible for anything to be more minute. Yet because the individual soul is a conscious entity, consciousness pervades his material body. As a dependent sentient being, the living entity is subordinate to the Supreme Controller, and his capacity to perform action is subordinate to him. The individual soul is thus regulated by the Supreme Lord. It is written in Vedanta Sutra 2.3.33, Karta Shashtartha Vatat. Karta Shashtartha Vatat. That was hard to say. By this aphorism, it is understood that the living entity has the capacity to perform action. Here a question arises. If the living entity is the doer, then why has Sri Krishna stated the following in Bhagavad Gita 3.27? Prakrite kriyanani gunai karmani sarvasha ahankara vimudatma kartaham iti manyate. All aspects of material activity are performed by the three binding forces of material nature. But a person whose intelligence is bewildered by false ego thinks himself to be the doer. In answer to this, Sri Ramanujacharya explains, the purport of this verse from Gita is that when engaged in mundane activities, the living entity bewildered by Maya is impelled by the modes of nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance. The aforementioned aphorism from Vedanta Sutra speaks of the jiva's inherent nature as being a performer of action. Despite the fact that the jiva is the doer, he is not independent. He is dependent upon Parameshwar. For this reason, Shruti states, Esha hyeva sadhu karma karayati tam yam ebhyo unishate. Esha hyeva sadhu karma karayati tam yam ado ninishate. Koshi Taki Upanishad 3.8. The Supreme Lord engages a person in pious activities if he desires to elevate him to the higher planetary systems. But he engages a person in impious activities if he wants to demote him to lower planets. This raises another question. If it is actually the Lord who engages the living entity in good and bad works, Why does the living entity have to take responsibility for his actions? Why does he have to experience the good or bad results of his activities? The answer is that it is not that a jiva has no authority to act and that he is simply impelled to act by the Lord. Parameshwar is the effective cause of action, and the jiva is the dependent performer of action. In other words, the Lord simply gives the energy to perform action. It is impossible for the jiva to perform any activity without the energy of the Lord. By that energy, the jiva is able to perform action according to his own desire. Therefore, it is not Ishwar who is responsible for the living entity's action, which bears consequences. The living entity alone is responsible. So karma phala bhuk puman. Everyone enjoys or suffers the result of his actions. Just seeing. Okay, yeah, it's showing. Okay. The first type of independent sentient being, such as Sri Narayan, is beyond Maya. So, Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura. The first type of independent conscious controller who is untouched by Maya is known by names like Narayan. Srimad Bhagavatam 10.88.5 states, Harir hi nirguna shakshat purusha prakrite para. Shri Hari is beyond material nature and has no connection with the material modes. He is the supreme personality of Godhead and situated in absolute transcendence. Okay, my Gurudev's commentary, Piyush Varshanavruti. Independent conscious controllers are of two types. Those who are untouched by Maya, and those who for the sake of pastimes, accept the touch of Maya. Sentient beings without any contact with Maya are known by names like Sri Narayan. This refers to the Lord of Vaikuntha, Sri Narayan, the pastime expansion, Vilasmurti of the non-dual absolute truth, to Swayam Bhagavan Sri Krishna, and to the other forms of the Lord, such as Sri Ram, Nrsimha, Varaha, and Vaman. Oh, sorry, I read that wrong. But anyways, you get that. This refers to Narayan, this refers to Swayam Bhagavan Sri Krishna, and to other forms like Sri Ram, Varaha, Nrsimha, Varaha, and Vaman. These forms of Bhagavan are beyond the influence of the illusory potency, beyond the influence of time, and beyond the material modes of nature. In other words, they are composed of eternality, sat, cognizance, chit, and bliss, ananda. Because all these forms of Bhagavan are Satchidananda, we see that they are simultaneously localized and all-pervading. Material illusory objects, however, cannot possibly possess two contradictory inherent natures simultaneously. They can't be all-pervading and also localized. But Bhagavan is like that. All the forms of the Lord are eternal, and because of their magnitude, they pervade space, time, and all things. It is to be understood that the concept of any tangible form being localized is applicable only to illusory objects of the mundane world. Shri Bhagavan's nature and form are non-different from each other. Shri Bhagavan's nature and form are non-different from each other. And because all his forms are composed of eternality, cognizance, and bliss, they are each everlasting, self-manifesting, beyond the influence of Maya, and entirely devoid of inert matter. Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila 558 states, Karana Samudra Maya Parashite Nare. Beyond the material nature lies the causal ocean, which Maya cannot touch. Beyond the causal ocean lies the spiritual sky, which is also beyond the influence of Maya. Because Maya is absent from that place, illusory mundane objects also do not exist there. There, Bhagavan in his innumerable forms remains ever immersed in the rapture of sweet pastimes with his beloved associates. Srimad Bhagavatam 10.88.5 explains, Harir hi nirguna shakshat purusha prakrite para sa sarva drig upadrashta tam bhajan nirguno bhavet. Certainly, Shri Hari himself is directly the Supreme Person who is beyond the modes of material nature. He is the all-seeing witness. those who worship him also transcend the modes of nature. Because Sri Hari is transcendental to Maya and without any material qualities, his worshippers also become free from material qualities. Without worshipping him, it is impossible to become free of them. Okay, so that was all in this chart. That was all explaining the independent, all-pervading Lord. This was explaining Narayan. And now we're going to read about Shiva, who accepts the touch of Maya for Leela. This is Narayan, who's beyond the touch of Maya, and Shiva, who accepts the touch of Maya for pastimes. The second type of independent sentient being, such as Lord Shiva, accepts the touch of Maya. Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura. The second type of independent conscious controller is willingly touched by the material energy for the sake of pastimes, Leela, and is known by names such as Shiva. Scripture explains, Shiva-caturdaśī shashvat tri-lingo gunasamvrita. Sri Shiva has a perpetual relationship with the material energy. He manifests himself in three features and is enveloped by the three modes. Srimad Bhagavatam 10.88.3. It is inappropriate, however, to suspect that enveloped by the three modes means that Lord Shiva is an ordinary living being, a Jiva. It has been stated in Brahma Samhita 5.45. By adding a special transformative substance such as yogurt culture, milk is transformed into yogurt. The yogurt, however, is never a fully separate substance, independent of its cause, milk.
It's 8 o'clock.
I offer my obeisance to that primeval Lord, Sri Govindadev, who has assumed the form of Sri Shiva for a distinct purpose. Many Puranas and Agama scriptures establish Lord Shiva as having the position of Ishvara, the controller. So my Gurudev's commentary, Piyush Varshnavati. The second type of conscious controller touches the material nature for the sake of Leela, transcendental pastimes, and is known by names such as Shiva. Here, the word Leela means that Sri Shiva, in accordance with his own independent desire, slightly contacts the illusory energy to accomplish his cosmic duties. Srimad Bhagavatam 10.88.3 also explains this. Shiva-caturdaśī shashvat tri-lingo gunasamvrita vaikarikas taijasascha tamasashchetaham trida. Shiva is eternally endowed with his potency. Being a gun avatar of Sri Hari, he is all-powerful. A gun avatar is one of, gun avatar refers to manifestations of the Supreme Lord avatars that rule over the modes of material nature. Goodness, passion, ignorance. So, Brahma, Shiva, Vishnu. So being a gun avatar of Sri Hari, he is all-powerful. He is Tri-linga, meaning that he is the presiding deity of the three types of material ego: goodness, passion, and ignorance. In other words, the three modes of material nature are thoroughly embodied in him. Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura states that although the words guna samvrita in the above-mentioned verse indicate that Sri Shiva is covered by the modes of nature, it is improper to think that he is an atomic conscious living entity, Jiva-tattva. The Jiva is bewildered by the actions of the three modes of nature, but Sri Shiva voluntarily embraces those modes. Give me a second. I'm just going to close the door because it's distracting for me, the kirtan going on. So I'll be right back. In his commentary on Śrīmad Bhagavatam, known as Sri Brihad Vaishnava Toshani, Śrīla Sanatana Goswami sheds further light on this in the introduction to his explanation of this verse. In essence, he says that Sri Shiva is a gun avatar of Bhagavan. Therefore, although he is non-different from Bhagavan, he voluntarily embraces the modes of material nature in order to quickly fulfill the desires of those practicing bhakti with material motives. Consequently, devotees of Lord Shiva receive material opulence in accordance with their desires. Shri Hari is supremely merciful, because even if his devotees are full of material desires, he never gives them material wealth, opulence, and so forth, because these desired material objects bind a person to Maya. Instead, Shri Hari gradually minimizes their material hankerings by making them relish his charming sweetness, his Mādhurya. In this way, by awarding his devotees the treasure of prema, which is beyond the material modes, he reveals his true greatness and makes their life successful. So if you want a lot of money, don't worship Shri Hari, worship Lord Shiva. But if you want to relish Shri Bhagavan's charming sweetness, then worship Shri Hari. Parikshit Maharaj once asked Śrīla Shukadeva Goswami, "O great sage, Lord Shiva has rejected all material enjoyment, but it is seen that almost all of those who worship him are wealthy and have all material comforts. On the other hand, Shri Hari is the husband of the goddess of fortune, and he revels in all sorts of enjoyment and opulence. But for the most part, his devotees are materially impoverished. So those who worship the renunciate are enjoyers, and the devotees of the enjoyer are renounced. What is the mystery behind these diametrically opposite outcomes?" In response, Śrīla Shukadeva Goswami elaborated on the nature and worship of Lord Hari and Lord Shiva, on Shiva's being touched by the illusory potency, and on Shri Hari's being beyond the influence of material nature. These topics are described in Srimad Bhagavatam 1088. Although Bhagavan Shri Hari and Lord Shiva are not the same, they are nonetheless one in tattva. They represent two different types of lordship. Sriman Mahadev voluntarily accepts the qualities of material nature, but we should not think that he is subjugated by Maya like the jivas swallowed up by her. While Sriman Mahadev is endowed with the qualities of material nature, he is certainly not in the category of Jiva-tattva. Oh, Mahadev is another name for Shiva, by the way. Mahadev, Sadashiv, Shiv. Yeah, it's all referring to the same person. So while Sriman Mahadev is endowed with the qualities of material nature, he's certainly not in the category of Jiva-tattva. The Jiva is bound and controlled by the modes of material nature. But Lord Mahadev, being the predominating deity and controller of those modes, is not bound by them. The author substantiates this by quoting Sri Brahma Samhita 545. Chiram yata tati vikara vishesha yogat sanjayate nahi tata pritagasti heto yasham bhutam apitata samupaiti karyad govindamari purusham tamaham bhajami. The purport of this verse is that just as milk is transformed into yogurt by contact with the transforming agent, he who assumes the form of Shambhu, Lord Shiva, for a special purpose is non-different from the root cause of his manifestation, Shri Govinda. Yet his controllership is subordinate to that of Govinda, the supreme controller. He is not a controller separate from him. For the purpose of accomplishing a special lila, the supreme controller assumes a separate form who accepts subordination to him. So that makes sense, right? A special transformation occurs when the following three combine. 1. The material potencies, the Maya's quality of ignorance. 2. The marginal potencies, the Tatastha Shakti's quality of minuteness. And 3. The transcendental potencies, the Chit Shakti's quality of cognizance, Samvit, mixed with a touch of transcendental bliss, Ladini. So in Maya, the Tatastha Shakti, and Chit Shakti, when these three combine, there's a special transformation. This special transformation is known as Lord Shiva, who is the very embodiment of the three types of egotism. He is celebrated as a guna avatar of Shri Govinda. Therefore, Shri Shiva is non-different from Shri Hari. In his commentary on this verse from Brahma Samhita, Shri Jiva Goswami quotes a mantra from the Rig Veda. Ata nityo deva eko narayana Brahma Narayana Shivascha Narayana Ityadi. Narayan is the only eternal Lord. Brahma and Shiva also have the same nature as Sri Narayan. There is no difference between them. In this way, knowing that Lord Shiva is endowed with the illusory potency, one should never consider him to be Jiva-tattva. He is certainly Ishvara-tattva. If, therefore, a need arises for one who is exclusively devoted to Sri Hari and Ananya Bhakta to worship Shiva, he can worship him with the understanding that Sri Hari is situated within Lord Shiva's heart. In this regard, Sri Jiva Goswami in his Bhakti Sandarbha Anuchhed 106 cites a history from the Vishnu Dharmottara. Once a devotee Brahman named Vishwaksena, who was exclusively devoted to Sri Hari, was traversing the earth. One day, when he was sitting alone in the forest, the son of the village chief approached him and inquired about his identity. When the devotee Brahman introduced himself, the son of the village chief said, Today I have a headache. Please act as my representative and do puja to my worshipful deity, Lord Shiva. Upon hearing his request, the devotee Brahman replied, O young man, I am exclusively devoted to Sri Hari. I never worship any demigod, only the deity of Shri. Please go away. The son of the village chief repeatedly implored that devotee, but the devotee Brahman would not agree to perform that worship under any condition. Enraged, the son of the village chief readied himself to decapitate the stunned Brahmin. Oh my God. Death at the hands of this youth is not at all desirable, he thought. What shall I do? After some reflection, he agreed to perform the worship. As he approached the Shiva Linga, he thought, at the time of devastation, Lord Shiva, in order to destroy the creation, increases the mode of ignorance. Bhagavan Sri Nrsimha desires to destroy the ignorant demons and remove that ignorance. For this reason, he appears among them like the sun dissipating thick darkness. This son of the village chief is also among the ignorant demons. I shall therefore worship Sri Nrsimhadev at this site of Lord Shiva to destroy the wicked mood of these rascal Shiva worshippers. Having decided this, he recited the mantra Om Nrsimhaya Namah. Just as he was about to offer flowers to the deity of Lord Shiva, the young son of the village chief, engulfed by wrath, raised his sword to cut off the Brahman's head. At that moment, Lord Nrsimhadev suddenly burst out of the Shiva deity. He destroyed the young son of the village chief along with his entire family. This legendary pastime place of Sri Nrsimhadev, named Lingospota, is in South India, and the worship of Sri Nrsimhadev continues there to this day. This story illustrates how Sri Hari and Lord Shiva are non-different. Lingospota. Okay. Lord Brahma, a Jiva, is also invested with the potency of the Supreme Lord. Let me see if there are any comments. No, okay. Okay, so Lord Brahma, the Jiva, is also invested with the potency of the Supreme Lord. Bhavanuvad. Furthermore, Srimad Bhagavatam 1.2.23 states, Sattvam Rajas Tama iti prakriter guna. Goodness, passion, and ignorance are the three modes of material nature. The transcendental lord of these three modes of nature, Sri Hari, in order to perform the three separate functions of universal maintenance, creation, and destruction, is known by the names Hari, Lord Vishnu, Virinchi, Lord Brahma, and Hara, Lord Shiva, respectively. A general understanding of this verse suggests that Brahma, too, has the quality of Godhood, Ishvarata. Yet it should be understood that Brahma's Godhood is a result of his being invested with the power, the Shakti Vesh, of the Supreme Lord, Shri Krishna. Brahma Samhita 549 states, just as the sun partially manifests its energy in the jewel known as the Suryakant, similarly, Shri Govinda manifests some of his potency in a qualified living entity who, as Brahma, creates the material universe. I worship that primeval Lord Govinda. Would you guys just mind waiting 1 second? I just need to, I'm just gonna give somebody my plate so they can save prasad for me, and then I can continue reading and I won't miss prasad. So I'll be back 1 second. Yes. Thank you so much. Okay, sorry about that. I'm back. Let's see how many people left. Oh wow, everybody's patiently waited for me. Thank you so much. All right, let me close this. Open this. Okay. So Lord Shiva's godhood is celebrated within the scripture. So we learned about Lord Brahma. Yes. Lord Brahma is a Shaktivish. He has some of the potency invested in him from the Supreme Lord, Shri Krishna. So, my Gurudev's commentary. Lord Shiva's godhood is celebrated within scriptures such as the Puranas and Agamas. Lord Shiva is not the original controller, independent of Sri Hari. This is clearly stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 1:2-23. Sattvam rajas tama iti prakriter gunastaya. Yukta para purusha eka ihasya tatte. Stityadhaye hari virincha hareti samgya. Shayangsi tatra kalu sattva tanor nirinam syu. Material nature consists of 3 qualities: sattva, goodness; rajas, passion; and tamas, ignorance. Accepting these 3 in order to perform the activities of creation, maintenance, and dissolution, the one non-dual Paramatma adopts the 3 names of Hari, Vishnu, Virinchi, Brahma, and Hara, Rudra, respectively. Even so, Sri Hari, who accepts the material mode of goodness, bestows the supreme benefit upon human society. The one supreme absolute truth manifests himself as Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahadev in order to create, maintain, and destroy the universe, respectively. All 3 are guna avatars of Parabrahma. Brahma is assigned the mode of passion, and Shiva is assigned the mode of ignorance. Unlike Sri Vishnu, they do not have the quality of being the Supreme Lord. They bestow, did I make the screen bigger? They bestow religiosity, dharma, economic development, artha, and sense gratification, kam. Sri Vishnu, the gun avatar endowed with the mode of goodness, is able to bestow moksha, a liberation from Maya. Here, Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura explains that in a general sense, this verse establishes that Brahma, like Shiva, also possesses the quality of a controller, but that this is because he has been invested with the potency of Bhagavan. In other words, an aspect of the Lord's potency is conferred upon him. The Brahma Samhita 549 states, Vaśvānyatamsha sakaleshu nijeshu teja swiyam kiyat prakatayatya pitarvadartara Brahmaya esha jagaranda vidhana karta govindamari purusham tamaham bhajami. Just as the sun manifests its potency to a minute degree within jewels such as Suryakanta and invests them in the power to burn, similarly, Shri Govinda also infuses his creative potency within the secondary creator of the universe, Brahma. I worship that original personality, Shri Govinda. The sadhak should understand that the glories of the Lord are comprehended according to the type of worship performed. Upasana Bhede Jani Ishvara Mahima. Shri Caitanya-tattva Adi Lila 227. Worship of the guna avatars, Brahma and Shiva, is mixed with the modes of material nature, the gunas. It is not transcendental, nirguna. It can bestow no more than religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation. Only the Supreme Lord Bhagavan Sri Hari is transcendental and beyond the influence of Maya. Worship of him is also transcendental. Bhakti alone is the transcendental method of worship that results in the sadhak's attainment of the fifth goal of life, Krishna Prem, thus crowning his life with complete success. Śrīla Rupa Goswami writes in Sri Lagu Bhagavatamrita, Santvavatara Bahava Pushkara Nabhasya Sarvato Bhadra Krishnad Anya Kova Latash Vapi Prema Do Bhavati. Sri Hari, whose navel is like a lotus, has limitless incarnations, all of whom are auspicious in all ways. But who except Sri Krishna can give the gift of prem, even to vines, trees, and shrubs, let alone to conscious living entities? Only Sri Krishna bestows prem. The author further clarifies this topic later in this work. This is a really interesting point. According to one perspective, the mode of ignorance is superior to the mode of passion. What? The mode of ignorance is superior to the mode of passion? We'll find out why. So Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura writes, Srimad Bhagavatam 1.2.24 states that smoke is superior to wood, which is a transformation of earth, and that fire is superior to smoke, because the fire into which oblations are offered bestows a good destination, such as heavenly enjoyment. In the same way, the mode of passion is superior to the mode of ignorance, and the mode of goodness is superior to the mode of passion, because it gives direct perception of undifferentiated impersonal Brahma. This verse characterizes the mode of passion as superior to that of ignorance. Nonetheless, in the mode of passion, which is compared to smoke, it is impossible to perceive Ishvara, the Supreme Lord, who is compared to pure, effulgent fire. He, in his impersonal feature, can only be perceived in the mode of goodness, which is similarly compared to blazing fire. Ishvara is also present in the mode of ignorance, which is compared to wood, but imperceptibly so. Got that? So Ishvara isn't present in passion, which is like fire, which is like smoke, which is compared to smoke. But Ishvara is imperceptibly present in the mode of ignorance, which is compared to wood. Just as fire is present in a latent matter, just as fire is present in a latent matter within wood, and manifests externally as a result of friction, Ishvara is present within the quality of ignorance in an unmanifest form, making ignorance, from my perspective, superior to passion. The function of the mode of ignorance is to induce deep, dreamless sleep, likened to the happiness of monistic knowledge. Considering this, the truth of the matter is to be understood. So we'll understand this more. So I think this is also being explained because in the previous part, we were reading how Lord Brahma, a Jiva, is also invested with the potency of the Supreme Lord. But right now, we're understanding, though, that Shiva is superior to Lord Brahma. So that's what this is explaining. Okay. So my Gurudev's commentary, Vyushvarshini Vritti. At the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, the sages headed by Sri Shanak Rishi inquired from Sri Sutta Goswami about the various avatars of Bhagavan. Sri Sutta Goswami described the godhood of the undivided, non-dual source of all avatars, Sri Krishna, who is devoid of the following three differences. Okay, so Bhagavan is devoid of the three differences. One difference is Svajatiya, difference within the same category, meaning separateness between Sri Krishna and his various manifestations. Krishna is not different from his various manifestations. Krishna is not different from Nrsimha. Ram is not different from Varaha. They are all of the same category. Vijatya, the difference across categories, meaning separateness between Sri Krishna and his different potencies, such as the material nature and the living entities. So there's no difference between the Chit Shakti, there's Chit Shakti, the Jiva Shakti, and the Tashta Shakti. I don't really totally get that. Anyhow, we'll right. And then Swagata, difference between his own being, meaning separateness between Sri Krishna and any aspect of him, such as his name, form, attributes, and pastimes. I always thought of this meaning difference between like his different senses. Anyways, we'll find out more. Just as innumerable streams, like the verse from Brahma Samhita, Angani Yasa Sakalendriya Vrittimati, through his ears he can see, through his mouth he can hear, like that. Anyways, just as innumerable streams flow from an inexhaustible reservoir of water, the primeval absolute truth manifests unlimited avatars. In this way, Sri Krishna has been declared Swayam Bhagavan, the original form of Bhagavan who has no source other than himself. Those who are conversant with tattva, ontological truths, refer to his bodily luster as Brahma, his partial expansion as Paramatma, the Supersoul, and his pastime expansion is Bhagavan Sri Narayan. In this way, the non-dual supreme absolute truth, Swayam Bhagavan Sri Krishna, performs many varieties of pastimes in this universe. As the cause of all causes, he performs the activities of creation, maintenance, and annihilation through his forms as the guna avatars, who preside over the material modes of nature, sattva, raja, and tama. As Sri Vishnu, the presiding deity of the mode of goodness, sattva-gun, he maintains the universe. As Sri Brahma, the presiding deity of the mode of passion, rajagun, he creates the material universe. As Lord Shiva, the presiding deity of the mode of ignorance, tamagun, he destroys the creation. Although Sri Vishnu is the presiding deity of sattva-gun, he always remains aloof and uncovered by that mode. Shiva, however, remains covered by tamagun, and Brahma by rajagun. Because the modes are functional differences, it has been explained that the mode of passion is superior to the mode of ignorance, and that the mode of goodness is superior to the mode of passion. An example of this is given in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.2.24. Smoke is superior to wood because smoke moves, while wood does not. Also, in smoke, one experiences a small amount of heat. Fire is superior to smoke because in fire there is illumination. In the same way, the mode of passion is superior to the mode of ignorance, and the mode of goodness is superior to the mode of passion. So that makes sense, right? The mode of goodness is also superior because it can lead to realization of impersonal Brahma. This is corroborated in Srimad Bhagavatam 11.25.24. Kaivalyam sattvikaram jnanam rajo vikalpikam chayat prakritam tamasam jnanam man nishtam nirgunam smritam. Sri Krishna said, O Uddhav, knowledge aimed at attaining monistic liberation, Kaivalya Gyan, is in the mode of goodness. Knowledge based on the bodily conception is in the mode of passion, and foolish materialistic knowledge is in the mode of ignorance. Knowledge in relation to me. Is in the mode of ignorance. Knowledge in relation to me, however, is transcendental. In his explanation of this verse given in his Sri Kram Sandarbha, Sri Jiva Goswami writes, Kevalasya nirvisheshasya brahmana shuddha jiva abhedena jnanam kaivalyam. Knowledge of the oneness of the pure living entity, the Shuddha Jiva, and the featureless aspect of the Absolute, Nirvishesh Brahma, is called Kaivalya Gyan. This Kaivalya Gyan is awakened by the influence of the mode of goodness. Thus, the word Kevala indicates Nirvishesh Brahma. In other words, the mode of goodness awakens knowledge of the oneness of the pure soul with Nirvishesh Brahma. Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura makes the point that firewood is compared to the quality of ignorance, smoke to the quality of passion, and blazing fire to the quality of goodness. The impersonal aspect of the absolute, Nirvishesh Brahma, manifests in sattva gun, not in a smoke-like mode of passion. But some heat is felt due to the fire. Fire, which manifests from friction, is present in firewood, which represents the mode of ignorance. Similarly, Satchidananda-tattva is present within Lord Shiva, who is the presiding deity of the mode of ignorance. And Srimad Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj, he explains in this connection, Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura raises the point because one can consider that since smoke is superior to wood, Brahma, who represents the quality of passion, may be superior to Shiva, who represents the quality of ignorance. So that's why this point is being brought up, because consciousness exists even in deep, dreamless sleep, which is a function of tamogun. This indicates that the non-dual absolute truth permeates Lord Shiva. That same supreme truth manifests himself as the guna avatars of Sri Brahma to create, of Sri Vishnu to maintain, and of Lord Shiva to annihilate the universe. The systematic analysis of ontological truth reaches this conclusion. So that was really complicated, I know, but does that make sense? You can't make, like, fire is fire, you know, but in smoke, which is compared to passion, you can't manifest fire. Fire, you can't make fire from smoke, but you can make fire from wood. So fire is present in wood in an unmanifest form. So in the same way, Vishnu is present within Lord Shiva. Like there's no, but he's imperceptible. So Shiva and Vishnu are non-different in that way. That's kind of what it's saying, from my understanding. So, okay, moving on. So we just did this. Caitanya-tattva, the Anthology of sentient beings. So we learned about two sentient beings. One is independent, which refers to Narayan, who's not beyond the touch of Maya, and Lord Shiva, who accepts the touch of Maya for pastimes. So that's the one kind of sentient being, the independent one. And now we're going to read about the dependent sentient being, the minute living entity who pervades the body. And so this is going to be further flipping down. Anyways. Two types of dependent entities, those covered by ignorance and those not covered by ignorance. Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura's Bhava. Sentient beings are controlled by Ishvara, the Supreme Lord. Sentient beings controlled by Ishvara, the Supreme Lord, are known as Jivas. They are classified in two ways according to their condition. Those covered by ignorance and those not covered by ignorance. Sentient beings not covered by ignorance are also of two types. Those invested with the Lord's potency of the divine majesty and those not invested with that potency. My Gurudev's commentary, Piyush Varshaneviti. For the reader to understand the difference between Lord Shiva, who is counted as a manifestation of the Lord, and Sri Brahma, who is counted as a living entity, Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura first differentiates between types of sentient living entities. At the beginning of this section, it was stated that there are two categories of sentient beings: independent, swatantra, and dependent, aswatantra. Aswatantra Chaitanya refers to the sentient beings who are under the control of the Lord. So the Jivas, the living entities. These dependent sentient entities are further divided into two categories: those engrossed in ignorance and those not engrossed in ignorance. 5 kinds of miseries, kleshas, afflict those engrossed in ignorance: nescience, avidya, a false conception of I and mine, asmita, material attachment, rag, aversion, dvesh, and absorption in material objects, abhinivesh. Such sentient beings are covered by ignorance and controlled by the results of their actions. Since time immemorial, they have taken birth in species of demigods, humans, birds, and beasts, agonizing in the blazing fire of the threefold miseries. The second type of sentient beings are not engrossed in ignorance. Since time immemorial, they have been free from ignorance and untouched by the mundane conceptions of I and mine. They are further divided into 2 types: those invested with the Lord's potency of divine majesty, Aishvarya-shakti, who perform superhuman acts, and those not invested with that potency. Okay, so see this chart is the dependent living entities not covered by ignorance and those covered by ignorance. So those who are not covered by ignorance, those jivas who are not covered by ignorance, those are also further divided: those invested with the Lord's Aishwarya Shakti, with the Lord's opulence, and those not invested with the Lord's Aishwarya Shakti. Jiva is liberated from ignorance. The Jnani merges with Brahma, but the Bhakta relishes the charming sweetness of Bhagavan. Bhavanuva. This is Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura. The sentient beings who do not possess the potency of divine majesty can be broadly categorized into 2 groups: those who have merged into Ishvar through the cultivation of Jnana, and those who have not merged with him, and have been established in eternal servitude. The sentient beings in the former category are in a deplorable state. The sentient beings in the latter category can taste the Lord's Mādhurya, so they are not at all pitiable, but full of transcendental bliss. My Gurudev's commentary, Piyush Varshnaviti. Those not invested with the Lord's potency of divine majesty are also of 2 types. The first are those who cultivate Brahma Jnana, thinking themselves to be one with transcendence. Such living entities merge with the featureless aspect of the absolute truth, Nirvishesh Brahma. That is, they attain Sayujya Mukti. Some achieve Ishvara Sayujya, meaning they merge with the form of the Lord, who is replete with divine attributes. We should understand that even though the Jnanis think themselves to be Brahma, they cannot possibly become Brahma. Their separate existence remains because they are not independent sentient beings, but eternally dependent sentient beings. They are not personal expansions of the Lord, Svangsha. Rather, they are eternally separated expansions, Vibhinangsha. So a Vibhinangsha, a separated expansion of the Lord, can never become a Svangsha, a personal expansion of the Lord. The situation of these Jnanis is said to be lamentable, because they are unable to savor any of the qualities of Brahma. In merging with the impersonal Brahma, that which is relished, the person relishing and the act of relishing are one and the same. These Jnanis are thus deprived of the ecstatic taste or innate bliss of service to the Lord. Intelligent persons, therefore, prefer hell to Brahma Sayujya. Wow, that is strong. Intelligent persons, therefore, prefer hell to Brahma Sayujya. It's just like, anyways, never mind. I was about to say a doll made out of sugar cannot taste sugar because it's made of sugar. But I don't know if that's a good example. That might not be the right example. Okay. Merging with the form of the Lord, Ishvara Sayujya, is even more lamentable than merging with the featureless aspect of the Lord, Brahma Sayujya. Okay, so merging with the form of the Lord, Ishvara Sayujya, is more lamentable than merging with the featureless aspect of the Lord, Brahma Sayujya. Because while Nirvishesh Brahma contains no variety, the form of the Lord is the abode of innumerable variegated qualities, forms, and pastimes. And the jivas who merge with him are deprived of relishing that variety. Who is more fortunate than one who lives inside of, who is more unfortunate than one who lives inside a storehouse of mercy, yet remains deprived of tasting even a drop of it? Therefore, Sri Caitanya-tattva Madhya Lila 6-269 states, Brahma sayuja hoite, Ishvara sayuja dikar. Merging with the form of the Lord is even more pitiable than merging with his bodily effulgence. The second type of sentient entity that is not invested with the Lord's Shakti does not merge with the Lord. Rather, by practicing bhakti in moods such as servitude and friendship, he attains the Supreme Lord in the form of his servant, friend, and so on. He thus becomes fortunate to relish the immense sweet happiness of serving the Supreme Lord. He is not at all unfortunate. Rather, he is glorious. According to the nature of his cherished mood of service, he tastes the inexhaustible sweetness of Sri Bhagavan, who is composed of eternality, cognizance, and bliss, thereby perfecting his life. Okay, so we just covered these two. So the dependent living entity who is not covered by ignorance, those are further divided into two. Those who are invested with the Lord's Aishwarya Shakti and those not invested with the Lord's Aishwarya Shakti. And those are further divided into two. This is what we just read about. The Jnani who merges with Nirgun or Sagun Brahma, which is deplorable. And we read about the Bhakta, who relishes the sweetness of the names, forms, qualities, and pastimes of Sri Bhagavan, which is laudable. Now we're going to read about the Jivas who are invested with the Lord's Aishwarya Shakti. The two types of living entities invested with the potency of Bhagavan. Okay, Vavanuvada. Sentient beings empowered with divine majesty are also of two types. Those who are empowered with knowledge arising from an aspect of the internal potency of the Lord, the Chit Shakti, and those who are invested with the creative potency, which arises from an aspect of the illusory energy, Maya Shakti. Okay, so those empowered by Chit Shakti and those empowered by Maya Shakti. Empowered with knowledge arising from Chit Shakti, and those are invested with creative energy coming from Maya Shakti. Sorry, I didn't say it. Okay, the former category includes the four sons born from the mind of Brahma, namely Chatusham. This refers to Chatushan, Sanak, Sanatan, Sanandan, and Sanat Kumar. The latter category includes Brahma and others. Okay, so Brahma's four sons, the four Kumaras, they are empowered with knowledge arising from the Chit Shakti, from the internal potency of the Lord. And Brahma, he is invested with the creative potency, which arises from the Maya Shakti. So now my Gurudev's commentary. Piyush Varshini Vritti. Those invested with the Lord's Aishwarya Shakti are also of two types. The first are invested with the Lord's transcendental potency, the Chit Shakti, are the Lord's divine majestic potency of transcendental knowledge, arising from the Lord's internal potency. Example are the four sons born from the mind of Lord Brahma, Sanak, Sanandan, Sanatan, and Sanat Kumar. Being always immersed in transcendental knowledge of Sri Hari, they wander here and there, unconnected to the creation of the material universe. The second type are invested with a portion of the Lord's external potency, the Maya Shakti, to perform acts such as creation. This refers to Lord Brahma, the grandfather of this universe, whom Sri Bhagavan invests with his Maya Shakti to accomplish the creation of the material world. In Sri Bhagavatamrita Kana, Śrīla Cakravartī Ṭhākura has identified the four Kumaras as Lila avatars, pastime expansions, and Sri Brahma as a Guna avatar. In this way, the ontology of sentient beings can be easily understood. So here's that chart that we were looking at. Okay, so we covered all of this whole chart, all these different sentient beings. The independent, all-pervading Lord, it's divided into two, Narayan, and so on, who are beyond the touch of Maya, and Shiva, and so on, who accept the touch of Maya for Lila, for the sake of pastimes. So see, there's a huge difference between Shiva and Brahma. Brahma is not an independent, he's not an independent, controller. Only Narayan and Shiva are independent controllers. Brahma is a dependent controller. Anyhow. Yeah, so the dependent controllers are divided into two, those who are not covered by ignorance, and those who are covered by ignorance, such as demigods, humans, birds, beasts, etc., all the living entities in this creation who have not been liberated. But then those who are not covered by ignorance, those are further divided into two, those who are invested with the Lord's Aishwarya Shakti, and those not invested with the Lord's Aishwarya Shakti. And those who are not invested with the Lord's Aishwarya Shakti, that refers to the Jnani who merges with Brahma, and the devotee who relishes the sweetness of the name, forms, qualities, and pastimes of Bhagavan. And those who are invested with the Lord's Aishwarya Shakti, that refers to those who are invested with the Gyan Shakti, and like the four Kumaras, and those invested with the creative potency, an aspect of Maya, such as Lord Brahma. So that's the difference between Shiva and Brahma. Okay, let's see if I lost everybody. Yeah, I lost almost everybody. There are only 2 people left. All right, that's fine. Okay. Although Sri Vishnu and Shiva are non-different, only Sri Vishnu is to be worshipped. Bhav Anuvad. So this is Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura. As they are both in the category of independent controllers, it is established conclusively that Sri Vishnu and Lord Shiva are non-different. Nevertheless, for the practitioner who is free from material desires, the subject of who is to be worshipped and who is not to be worshipped should be discerned after carefully deliberating upon the object of worship's nirgunatva or sagunatva, the attribute of being beyond material nature or within material nature. All right. So, anyways, we'll just read in the commentary. My Gurudev's commentary, Piyush Vaishnaviti. It is understood from the previous section that Sri Vishnu and Lord Shiva are non-different in terms of tattva, solely because they are in the same category of sentience, Ishvar Chaitanya. In other words, by accepting the mode of ignorance, the all-pervading sentient being Sri Vishnu, for the sake of pastimes, has become Shiva. It is also understood that only Shiva accepts this material mode, not Sri Sadashiva. Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura writes in his Sri Bhagavatamrita Kana, King cha Sadashiva Swayam Rupango Vishesha Swarupa Nirguna Sa Shiva Syangshi. Sri Sadashiv is not a gun avatar. Just like Sri Narayan, who is transcendental to material nature, just like Sri Narayan, who is transcendental to material nature. Oh, thank you so much. Very kind of you. Thank you. And my prasad. Didn't even have to leave. Okay, where were we? It is understood from the previous section that Sri Vishnu and Lord Shiva are not different in terms of tattva, solely because they are in the same category of sentience. In other words, by accepting the mode of ignorance, the all-pervading sentient being Sri Vishnu, for the sake of pastimes, has become Shiva. It is also understood that only Shiva accepts this material mode, not Sri Sadashiva. Sorry, I just read this. Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura writes in his Sri Bhagavatamrita Kana, Kim cha Sadashiva Swayam Rupango Vishesha Sarupo Nirguna Se Shiva, Shiva-caturdaśī. Shri Sadashiva is not a gun avatar. Just like Sri Narayan, who is transcendental to material nature, Sadashiva is a special expansion of Sri Krishna himself and the origin of the gun avatar Shiva. Shri Sadashiva resides in Sadashiva Loka, above the causal ocean, which is beyond Maya, while the Guna avatar Shiva resides on Mount Kailash. Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura has established the oneness of Sri Vishnu and Lord Shiva from the perspective of their both being independent sentient beings. He now considers the matter further from the perspective of worship. A selfless sadhak must determine his object of worship only after ascertaining whether or not his object of veneration is touched by the material modes. It was previously stated that Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma fulfill the desires of those who worship them with a yearning for the fruit of their worship. People who desire material wealth are naturally inclined to worship the demigods and goddesses who are within the material modes. But selfless sadhaks of bhakti do not have a trace of desire for any temporary illusory object. They desire only the eternal treasure of prema. Leaving aside the worship of Shiva and Brahma, who are of the material modes, they worship Shri Hari, who is transcendental to those modes and untouched by Maya. Because their worship is transcendental, they remain constantly immersed in relishing Shri Hari's names, forms, qualities, pastimes, and their ambrosial service to him. Not to speak of worldly wealth, they would not accept even the 4 types of liberation, such as living on the same planet of Bhagavan, Salokya, if it were offered to them. We just read this verse the other day in our Srimad Bhagavatam class. Salokya shashti samipya sarupakyatam it apyata diyamanam nagrinanti vina mat sevanam jana. Sri Kapila Dev said, "My dear mother, despite being offered the various kinds of liberation, living on the same planet as me, Salokya, possessing the same opulence as me, Sarshti, residing near me, Samipya, possessing a form like mine, Sarupya, and merging into my effulgence, Ekatra, or Sayujya, my pure devotees do not accept them. They accept only transcendental loving service to me." Those who worship the demigods and goddesses are materially motivated. Their reward is insignificant. Temporary wealth. Their reward is insignificant. Temporary wealth. Their reward is insignificant temporary wealth and opulence, which ultimately results in suffering. Indeed, it is necessary for such motivated worshippers to remember that, although the demigods and goddesses who are materially covered are easily pleased and thus bestow material wealth and opulence upon the worshipper, as soon as there is the slightest discrepancy in that worship, they curse him. Whoa, that's intense. Sometimes the demigods and goddesses fall into difficulty as a result of the benedictions they offer, having failed to anticipate the repercussions. We see in Srimad Bhagavatam 10:88 that Shriman Mahadev offered the Dima Vrikasura the benediction that if Vrikasura placed his hand on someone's head, that person would die. Upon receiving this benediction, Vrikasura wanted to test it by placing the hand upon Mahadev's head. Mahadev fled in fear, and Vrikasura gave chase. After traversing the earth, Mahadev fled to the heavenly planets, but no demigod was able to give him refuge. Finally, he went to Vaikuntha, beyond the material realm. Sri Narayan, taking the form of a young Brahmin boy, asked Vrikasura why he had come so far. Upon hearing Vrikasura's story, Sri Narayan said, "Because Lord Shiva was cursed by Daksha, he has become a ghoul, constantly wandering about in the company of witches and ghosts. His words can never be true. Put your hand on your own head and see for yourself." Thus bewildered by Sri Narayan's words, Vrikasura placed his hands on his head and immediately collapsed in a heap of ashes. Lord Brahma also offered rare benedictions to the demon Hiranyakashipu without considering the repercussions. Bhagavan Sri Nrsimhadev descended and killed Hiranyakashipu while carefully protecting the integrity of the benedictions given by Lord Brahma. He reproached Lord Brahma for offering such boons to the demon, likening it to feeding milk to a serpent. This also has been described in Srimad Bhagavatam. Sometimes a living entity is invested with the potency of Bhagavan. Sometimes a living entity invested with the potency of Bhagavan becomes Shiva. Bhav Anuvad. So this is Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura. The difference between Shri Vishnu and Brahma lies in a distinct type of sentience, the sentience of an independent controller, Ishvara Chaitanya, and the sentience of a dependent living entity, Jiva Chaitanya. In some places, Puranic statements highlight the non-difference between Shri Vishnu and Brahma, but it is to be understood that this is like the non-difference between the sun and the Surya-caturdaśī, a gemstone imbued with the potency of the sun. In certain lifetimes of Brahma, Mahakalpas, a living entity invested with the potency of the Lord, Shaktavesh, attains the attributes of Shiva. That is, just as Lord Brahma is classed as a Jiva, a minute spirit soul, Lord Shiva is sometimes classed as a Jiva also. It has been said in Hari Bhakti Vilas 173, anyone who sees the best of divine beings, Sri Narayan, to be the same as Rudra or Brahma, is certainly an atheist. This statement can be reconciled by considering Rudra to have the same characteristic as Brahma. In my Guru's commentary, Piyush Varshini Vritti. We should understand that Shri Vishnu and Brahma are distinguished by their sentience. In other words, Shri Vishnu is an independent sentient being, while Lord Brahma, being Jiva-tattva, is a dependent sentient being. Some Puranas highlight the non-difference between Shri Vishnu and Brahma, but it should be understood that this non-difference is like that between the sun and the Surya-kanta jewel, which is invested with the potency of the sun. The jewel and the sun are separate objects. Therefore, there is a permanent difference between them. But when the power of the sun is reflected in the Surya-kanta gemstone, then the gemstone is able to burn objects such as cloth. Because the Surya-kanta gemstone is invested with the burning potency of the sun, it is considered to be non-different from the sun. Similarly, because Lord Vishnu has partially invested Brahma with the material potency to create, some Puranas describe Shri Vishnu and Brahma to be non-different from each other. In truth, however, they are not identical, as Brahma is a dependent sentient being. Moreover, although Shri Vishnu and Lord Shiva are described as non-different, independent sentient beings, during some lifetimes of Brahma, a Jiva who is invested with the special potency of the Lord performs the activities of Shiva. Therefore, Sri Laghu Bhagavatamrita 2.27 states, Kachid Jiva Visheshatvam Haras Yoktam Vider Iva. Just like Brahma, Shiva is also sometimes a Jiva, Jiva-tattva. The second Namaparad enjoins that those who see a difference between the names, forms, qualities, and pastimes of Lord Vishnu and of those of Lord Shiva are offenders to the holy name. Nonetheless, it has been written elsewhere, Yastu Narayanam Devam Brahma Rudradi Daivatai Samatve Naiva Manyeta Sabshandi Bhaved Dhruvam. Hari Bhakti Vilas 173. One considers Brahma and Rudra, Shiva, to be on an equal level with Lord Narayan is certainly an atheist. Regarding Shri Vishnu and Shiva as different from each other, constitutes an offense to the holy name. So if we see Vishnu and Shiva as being different from each other, then we commit an offense to the holy name. What? But one who regards them as identical becomes an atheist. So if we think that they're different from each other, then we commit an offense to the holy name. But if we regard them as being identical to each other, we become an atheist. So there's no right way? Now it's going to be clarified. These scriptural statements appear contradictory. One may reconcile them, however, by understanding that these statements refer to the fault of regarding that form of Shiva who is in the category of Ishvar as different from Shri Vishnu, or the fault of regarding that form of Shiva who is in the category of Jiva, as non-different from Vishnu. Okay. That makes sense, right? In the same way, although Brahma generally belongs to the category of a Jiva, Scripture mentions that sometimes an expansion of Sri Hari may also assume the post of Brahma. Srimad Bhagavatam 4:24-29 states, So dharmanishta shatajanmabhi puman virinchatam eti tata param himam. A Jiva who properly executes his occupational duty within the Varnashram Dharma system for 100 births without fruit of desire becomes qualified to occupy the post of Brahma. Thus, at the beginning of creation, a qualified Jiva manifests from the lotus navel of Garbhodaksha Vishnu and occupies the post of Brahma. Bhagavan invests him with the potency of creation. In that age, in that kalpa, in which there is no such qualified Jiva, Sri Hari personally takes the post of a guna avatar, becoming Brahma and performing the work of creation. He is then called Hiranyagarbha Brahma, or that Brahma who is in the category of Ishvara. Confusing the position of Lord Shiva and Lord Vishnu, the second offense to the holy name. Without thoroughly reflecting on the spiritual truths that have been described thus far, some persons could wrangle as follows. Shri Vishnu is a supreme Lord, not Lord Shiva, or Lord Shiva is a supreme Lord, not Shri Vishnu. We are one-pointed worshippers of Shri Vishnu and will not even glance at Lord Shiva. Or, we are one-pointed worshippers of Lord Shiva and will not even look towards Shri Vishnu. One whose intelligence is engrossed in debate in this way
It's 9 o'clock.
Offenses to the holy name. By the ordinance of Bhagavan, such an offender may obtain the association of an exalted saintly personality who is conversant with all spiritual truths. He then becomes enlightened on this topic, and faith develops that the Sarup of Lord Shiva is not different from that of Lord Vishnu. Following this, exclusively through Nam Sankirtan, he becomes free from his above-mentioned offense to the holy name. Piyush Varshini Vritti, Gurudeva's commentary. While raising the topic that Lord Shiva's name, form, etc. are independent of, or different from those of Śrīla Viśvanātha, Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura clearly describes the cause and the method by which one can become free from this aparad. The root cause of offense to Bhagavat Tattva is a lack of understanding Bhagavan's intrinsic form and nature. In regard to Tattva Vastu, in regard to the transcendental truth, the teaching is that one certainly commits an aparad when one misunderstands the nature of Tattva Vastu, of the transcendental truth, taking it to be something else. Generally, those who do not thoroughly reflect on Vishnu Tattva and Shiva-tattva and the correlation between them, in other words, those who do not have the good fortune of associating with saints conversant with such transcendental truth and hearing from them about it, will commit this second aparad to the holy name. Those who worship Vishnu think, Shri Vishnu is the one supreme controller, Ishvara. Shiva is not. We are his exclusive devotees and will not take darshan of Lord Shiva. On the other hand, those who worship Shiva think, Shiva is the one supreme controller, Vishnu is not. We are the exclusive devotees of Lord Shiva and will not take darshan of Lord Vishnu. Those with such a belligerent attitude commit aparad. It was previously mentioned that aparad is an act that displeases one's worshipful deity. When the worshippers of Shri Vishnu and those of Lord Shiva speculate about the difference between their worshipful lords, those lords become displeased. Will a person be pleased by a servant who attends to one limb while piercing or giving pain to another? Shriman Mahadev is indeed part of Shri Vishnu. To consider him different from Lord Vishnu will invariably lead to aparad. Now, Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura explains the method to mitigate this offense. Lack of knowledge of Vishnu Tattva and Shiva Tattva is the root cause of this aparad. As long as one is devoid of proper knowledge, it cannot be nullified. If a person committing this offense is fortunate to receive the association of and to hear from a realized saint who is well versed in the actual truth regarding Vishnu-tattva and Shiva-tattva, he will have true realization of spiritual reality. He will then understand that Vishnu-tattva and Shiva-tattva are non-different. This is because true knowledge of the nature of Bhagavan is possible only through the association and mercy of sadhus. The Upanishads also enunciate this conclusion. Katha Upanishad concludes with a description of the incomprehensibility of Brahma. In other words, it shows how Brahma is beyond the reach of mind and speech. How then can Brahma possibly be understood? In answer to this question, it explains, Naiva vacha na manasa praptam shakyo na chakshusha astiti bhuvato nyatra katam tad upalabhyate. Ta Upanishad 2.3.12. Indeed, Brahma can never be attained by the mind, words, eyes, or any other sense organ. How can Brahma be understood? In answer, it is said, Brahma can be understood by keeping the close association of saints who are faithful. In Bhagavad Gita 4.34, Shri Krishna said to Arjuna, Upadekshyanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshinaha. O Arjuna, persons who are conversant with spiritual reality will enlighten you with knowledge of Brahma. By this, it is understood that no matter how expert one becomes in studying and understanding the revealed scriptures, there is no possibility of gaining true knowledge about the Supreme Personality of Godhead until one receives the association and mercy of great personalities who are endowed with direct realization and vision of the absolute truth. But it is also not guaranteed that this aparad will be destroyed upon receiving true knowledge of Vishnu-tattva and Shiva-tattvas from such personalities. The real atonement for this aparad is remorse. If one performs Nam Sankirtan with repentance, taking shelter exclusively of Nam Prabhu, this offense may be eradicated. All right, so that is the full explanation of the second offense to the holy name. And in it, we got into depth about Shiva-tattva. There's also a lot more to speak on Shiva-tattva. My Gurudeva wrote a book, there's a book compiled from my Gurudev's classes on Shiva-tattva. It's a little tiny booklet. Maybe we can read that tomorrow evening. All right, it's getting late and I'm going to take the slide now, so I'll just end here. It's always good to end with a little kirtana. So, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol. Jai Shri Shri Guru Brahma Dari Hari, Shri Shri Radha Vinod Bihari Ju ki Jai, Shri Gopinath Gopinath Maran Mohan ki Jai. Śrīla Siddhanta Saraswati Gosai Prabhupada ki Jai. Untitled Chapter Babaji Maharaj ki jai. Nitil Bhavishya Śrīla Satchidananda Bhaktivinoda Thakur ki jai. Nitil Bhavishya Vaishnav Sarvabhauma Śrīla Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj ki jai. Shri Rupa Nuvarya Guru Varga ki jai. Shri Rupa Sanatani Pata Raghunath. Shri Jiva Gopal Pata Dashavana Charaka Sai Prabhu ki jai. Shri Sarup Damodar Rai Ramanandani Shri Gaur Parshad Vrinda ki jai. Nama Jai Śrīla Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem se Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Kshetra Mandal Gaur Mandal Brajamandal Mathura Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Sarva Abhishya Gadadhar Giriraj Maharaj ki jai. Shri Radha Kunda Shama Kunda ki jai. Shri Muna Devi Kunda Devi ki jai. Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki jai. Shri Bhakti Devi ki jai. Shri Purnamasi Yogamaya ki jai. Shri Gopeshwar Mahadev ki jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai. Anantapati Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Samagata Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Gaur. Shri Vijaya Akarashi Titi ki jai. Titi Palan Hari Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Shiva ki jai. Shri Mahadev ki jai. Okay. Vrindai Tulsi Devai Jai Keshavashita Krishna Bhakti Tadadevi Satyavadaya Namaha Pancha Kalpashchuru Vyashta Kripa Sindhu Jai Vijay Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Yeah, that was pretty difficult, wasn't it? I'm kind of got it all, but not really. I think I need to read it one more time and then I'll have it. But, it was so helpful to read it out loud to you. I got it a lot better than I would have if I just would have read quietly to myself. So thank you so much for sticking with me. Madhavi TV from Hong Kong, Haribol, and Saraswati Shri Hari Bol.